Death of a Princess first aired in the spring of 1980. There was an oil crisis, 53 Americans were being held hostage in Iran, and Saudi Arabia was seen as a friend to the U.S. The docudrama tells the true story of a young Saudi princess rebelling against an arranged marriage. The film claims many wealthy Saudi women did what Mishal did. They took lovers on the side. But witnesses said she and her young lover were both publicly executed in 1977 for committing adultery.
They led him into the middle of the square. The guy's hands were tied behind his back. He looked as though he'd been drugged or beaten up or something. He was wobbling about all over the place. They led the girl off to the right-hand side as I were looking at it. She was veiled. I didn't see her face. The girl were already dead. She was just a black heap. They'd knelt her down like in front of the sand and shot her. And then they blindfolded the boy.
The original broadcast of Death of a Princess outraged the government of Saudi Arabia, members of Congress, and American oil companies, many of which supported public television but also made their profits on oil. The film's director, Anthony Thomas, spoke to Robin Young about the controversy that erupted 25 years ago.
It was a huge controversy. I mean, it was shown in Britain first, and that led to the expulsion of the British ambassador and stories, which of course never happened, that Britain's trade links would be broken and contracts cancelled and so forth. By the time it had come over here, it was ready to be shown here, things really heated up, and oil companies were taking, whole-page ads to try to disclaim the film. It was a heated time.
And for those who didn't see the film then, remind us, the princess who was killed was the granddaughter of the king's elder brother.
That's correct.
And tell us about the way you ended up having to tell the story. You researched, you traveled, you interviewed many people, but ended up dramatizing the interviews.
Yes, I mean, what happened was that a British carpenter who was staying in a sort of a hotel that was right on the site of the execution took photographs. Those were published and caused quite a stir. In our British Parliament, there were complaints, but of course, as soon as the Saudis reacted to those complaints, everyone apologized and talked about being sensitive to another culture and so forth. Then, at around about that time, I had dinner in London and hosted by somebody who was a very powerful person in Saudi Arabia, and he gave a version of that girl's death, which actually gave nobility to her and to the Saudis. It was a wonderful romantic story, and I was completely hooked on it. But something else quite fascinating was happening, that I found that this young princess was already a legendary figure in the Arab world, and everyone I spoke to sort of identified with her. If they were Palestinians, they saw her as a Palestinian freedom fighter, fighting for her dignity. She'd become a mythological figure. And I thought back on this, and I thought, wow, the way to tell the story is this journey through Arab lives, learning about the princess, being deflected, going off your track, and finally discovering the truth. But it was the journey itself that was so fascinating.
And let's hear some of it. Again, this is a dramatization of an interview that you did. You took the transcripts from the interviews. And let's be reminded, too, that this is one of the first times many Americans were introduced to topics such as radical Islam or Shia law. Let's listen to what one of your interview subjects told you.
To survive as an Arab, one has to become a schizophrenic. One has to learn to live in two worlds at once. It's difficult. For some, it is impossible. Like your princess. What a story. As you say, all the pressures. First the West, then the radicals in Beirut. And finally, when she's forced back into the desert matrix again, she says, no. She would rather destroy herself and the boy she loves. She could be any Arab girl in any Arab country.
Anthony, I'm thinking and listening to that again, Americans were shocked by this film, and then you fast forward almost quarter of a century, and it feels as if we all suffered temporary amnesia, because Americans seemed shocked again when they heard about these issues post 9/11 in Afghanistan, in Iraq. In your updating of this film, did you find that much has changed?
No, I mean, when I say updated, I haven't changed any of the editorial content at all. But I think the depressing thing about it is that all those issues that were there 25 years ago are still there. And it is depressing for the Arab people themselves that things stand still, that nothing is resolved, that all the old problems and troubles carry on and on and on.
Especially those people who told you that they saw this princess as either, as you said, a freedom fighter or an early feminist in Saudi Arabia. We just saw a recent election in the country and women were not allowed to run.
Correct.
But then there's another twist. Because we find out that perhaps what some thought was the official version of her death was not. Let's listen to Frontline's executive producer David Fanning commenting on that.
The difference between the official version, which was the girl was killed because she was found guilty of adultery, and the truth of it, which turns out that she was in fact murdered by the king's elder brother in an act of tribal vengeance in a parking lot in Jeddah, was in fact the heart of the controversy, because that was the part that, of course, the royal family could not countenance, and that was the great outrage.
Anthony Thomas, why was she killed?
Well, what happened was that she had a very short-term relationship, a very short-term infatuation with a young man that she'd actually first seen on television playing in a group. And it was a passionate, childish affair. She was only 19 years of age. And they drew attention to themselves by a very botched attempt to flee from the country together, with her disguised as a boy. And that attracted public notice. And in this patriarchal society, the idea of the old man, the old king's brother, that he felt that his dignity had been besmirched by her. There was no trial, there was nothing like that at all. And his own bodyguard, his own servants, were responsible for killing her in a public place.
Anthony Thomas, do you expect there to be outrage this time around?
I hope not. I hope people have grown up in the remaining 25 years. I mean, one of the surest ways of attracting attention to a program and to building up the viewing figures is to create a big fuss. And I think that a lot of institutions and countries have discovered that the best way is just to stay absolutely silent.
Do you think
Unless there's something in it which is so outrageous that you can simply, have the film taken off the air, that something is just so untrue and faked. But in most circumstances, it's better, I think, just to keep quiet.
Do you think that's also true that the Saudi Arabian government, the royal family, kind of has accepted the fact that the cat's out of the bag?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very counterproductive now to sort of start another attempt to sort of get the whole thing going again. I may be wrong, but I certainly do nothing to provoke them. But this is, I think the policy is probably just to let sleeping dogs lie.